Welcome back everyone. In our last lecture we have seen number of concepts that has been implied using Angular. We have gone through services, we have seen dependency injections, we have seen different directives, how we can apply those directives. We have roundabout studies major concepts of Angular. Today we will see few more concepts just like RxJs or what we say reactive programming, and how we can declare observables, and how we can subscribe and get the information from those observables. Then we will see the UI part of Angular. We already have seen Bootstrap. I will explain little more today about the Bootstrap. Then the material library of Angular that is also available to create some templates, and the animation module which is a built-in module of Angular. You can use that to uh, provide some animation to your application. And lastly we will see the JWT in our lecture. So let's start. What is reactive programming? Actually, reactive programming is a programming paradigm oriented around data flows and the propagation of change. It means whenever an event will occur, and that event will be propagated to the subscribers, to the listeners of that event. So that is basically a reactive programming, a data flow to and propagate, and also the propagation of change to the components that are subscribed to the change, or that are subscribed to some particular object. This means that it should be possible to express static or dynamic data flows with ease in programming languages used, and that the underlying execution model will automatically propagate changes through the data flow. For example, if there is some change on REST API data, our observable the observable will reflect the changes to the underlying systems, that is our components. The component will get the updated information through subscription to those observables. So that is the model with which our reactive programming works. In Rx programming, data flows emits by one component, and the underlying structure provided by the Rx library will propagate those changes to another component. Those are registered to receive those data changes. Long story short, there are basically three main points, key points. One is the observable, second is the observer, and the third is the scheduler. So these are the three main points with which this reactive programming works. We will see in detail every one of these. First, observables. Observable are nothing but the data streams. Those variables, those streams that generate data. Observable packs the data that can be passed around from one thread to another thread. So basically, observable is a stream, data stream. You can imagine the write stream and read stream, which we have studied in our Node.js lectures. So this is just a stream of data that can be passed to any component or anywhere where it is required. They basically emit the data periodically or only once in their life cycle. It depends. That can be a dynamic data changes or a static data. So if a stream emits some data or writes some data, we already know there is a way out to listen those data changes, that is dot on subscribe, to know that if there is some event occur, just like data event, your end event, or etc. So on these streams, observables are the streams, and we listen to these streams. Listening to these stream is called actually subscription to the streams. There are various operators that can help observer to emit some specific data based on certain events. These observables are as suppliers. They process and supply the data to other components. So actually, in this story, I will not explain all this story. Basically, cut short story is, observables cannot emit the data if there is no subscribers to them. So like this is an observable, and this observable is in a cold state until unless there is a subscriber for this. When we subscribe to listen to this observable, these observables start working and providing the data. Like in this case, we have defined the observable. When we subscribe to this observable, bs.subscribe, then this observable will start punching the data, will providing the data to the stream. So on that basis we can listen to that data. So this is the concept of reactive programming. Stream of data which will be provided to the end user or our component on the basis whenever the component will subscribe to that observable. Observers are basically the consumer of the data. They consume the data, they listen to the system. So observers subscribe to the observables using subscribe on method. Just like in case of streams, we have studied that stream can be subscribed using we can write the listeners using dot on listener, and with that we listen different data events. Just like whenever we write a data to the stream, there is a data event generated, and same whenever the data has been finished in the stream, then the end event will be generated, and same. So on the basis of events we listen those events, and on the basis of those events we process the data. Same here, we subscribe to subscribe on method to receive the data emitted by the observable. Whenever the observable emits the data, all the register observers, whoever listening to it, receives the data in on next callback. So whenever there is a new data, it will automatically broadcast to all the listeners, all the subscribers. Like if we have a REST API data related to some users, and those that data set is being subscribed by five of our components. Whenever there will be a change, that change will be reflected in every component automatically on next callback. Scheduler. Actually the whole process is handled by this scheduler. Scheduler actually is a library, RxJs library, that is built-in library in our Angular, and that library actually schedules everything. It scheduler are the component in Rx that tells observable and observers on which thread they should run. There are main default threads are provided in Rx Java, like schedulers.new threads will create new background that scheduler.io will execute the code on IO thread. So there are different threads that are working, and those threads will work according to the observables data emission, and passing out that data to our observers. So scheduler is the main point, is the main scheduling task handler, which provides the data, which gets from data from our observables and provided to the observables. A simple example, how to subscribe to an observable. Just an example. This is our service. It has a method, and if that method is of type observables. Why it can be an observable? Because whenever we call the REST API, we actually use HTTP client request service, and HTTP client request service is also already an observable. You don't need to declare it as an observable, but by default the HTTP client server is observable. So whenever we need to get the data from that observable, we have to subscribe to that method. So alternatively, what we are doing, this dot underscore data, that is our service dot user list. This is the service. This is the method we have implemented in our service, and then dot subscribe. That means from where that this data, this function is getting the data, that is actually an observable. So we are subscribing to that observable, and that observable will be returned as an data. If that is a data, we will put that data into our own variable, and if there is an error, we will provide it into error console, and we call the function. in case of success. So this is an example of subscribing to observable. Designing part. Before going to the designing part, let's see an example of how these observables can be declared by yourself and how that can be applied using some service. In this case, I am going to a sample code of data.service.ts. Here we are using two layouts of observable. One is a built-in service, that is HTTP. This HTTP, whenever we call this HTTP service, it is actually HTTP client server, which we renamed it as an HTTP. HTTP client server is always an observable. So we called the function doGet and this .http.get. By calling this http.get, we are creating an observable event, observable, and wherever we like to listen this, we will call this observable. Just like in this case, what we are doing, we have injected our service, this data service here, underscore data, and this dot underscore data dot doGet, the method which we have written here, doGet and dot subscribe. We are subscribing it because it is an observable. If it is not an observable, we cannot subscribe to this. It will give you an error. Okay, so this is a subscription to the observable. Now the REST API will get the data from this link and and the subscriber will get the data in shape of this data that is then entered into this dot employee and an object of us. So this is the way out, one way out, which we have already discussed in our code. And the second way out is we declare our own observable. To declare our own observable, what we have to do, in our data service, we have created a behavior subject. I have highlighted the line. This is an employees array which is of type any, and we have declared it as a behavior subject. The array which can be observed, which can be seen, which can change its values at runtime. So we are declaring it as a new behavior subject. So because it is a source of data, so that source of data is actually, we are defining an observable on it. What we have done, we have created a variable employee which is this dot employees dot as observable. So this variable is observable of this data source. So it will get the data from this data source, and provided this variable employee will get the data from employees array, and provided wherever this employee variable will be subscribed. Just an example is here. In this example, what we are doing, we have injected our data service, and then this dot underscore data dot employee dot subscribe, we are subscribing to a variable. Here we have declared it as a variable employee, and we are subscribing to this variable. Actually on the back end, this variable is an observable which is observing this bunch of data. So alternatively, what we receive, we will receive the array of employees. We will receive this whole array. So this is the way out. We can create our own observables. We have created our own observable using these two lines. We have created the behavior subject, and then we have defined the observable. Then we access that observable into our component using this dot, the name of the object or name of our variable which is an observable, and then dot subscribe, and we are subscribing to this. So we can subscribe to a function which is type of observable, and we can subscribe to a variable that is of type observable. So this is the way out with which we can handle observable. So we have implemented in our actual REST API. I have shown you some code in last class also. If we go to the data service, we have seen I have created few functions, view teacher, where I have called the get method, then I have called the post method, and etc. These are all observables, and whenever we call these into any component, we call that as an observable dot subscribe. So this is actually the concept of observable, with which we apply to our components and other services. So in next part we will discuss about designing. Thank you.